Hi guys, welcome back to my channel Dilli Rouge, and today I'm reviewing Oytra's basic variant of oven bake polymer clay. Please note, this is not a paid review and is based on my testing of the test samples that were sent to me by Oytra. I'll start with the packaging of this variant. The variant comes in a thin plastic cover packaging, no blister cover like the other variants. So you'll have to look at other options for storing this variant once you've opened it. Also, this variant does not come with an instruction manual unlike the other variants. Let's look at the consistency of this clay now. As you can see, I made a mistake of leaving the clay on top of the printed side of the packet. Clay has tendency of picking up inks from printed paper or plastic, so avoid making this mistake. Let me slice off a piece and try kneading it with my fingers. It's definitely a softer variant, very similar to the classic and the signature, I feel. I think the softness is very similar, but it doesn't feel so sticky. It's easier to manipulate with my hands, I can say that. I always prefer checking clay with the warmth of my hands and my fingers, and this seems to be holding pretty well under that. The softness of this clay looks actually very great. If I think about projects, I think this can work for most projects, maybe not caning so much, but basic canes can be made out of this clay as well, I feel. At the moment, I feel this can work for most projects like sculpting or caning or just regular clay embroidery or clay painting for that matter. I will not be leaching this variant since it doesn't need leaching. Very happy with the consistency of this particular color at least. If you notice, this one hasn't left much residue on the surface either. Plus it's a lighter color, so I was not expecting that to happen. I'll now check for the darker green variant how that shows up in consistency. This color also has a very similar softness, like it's not sticky at all. And however, I really wish that the packaging of this particular variant was slightly better. This also appears to be easier to condition with my bare hands. I don't think I would be needing a pasta machine to condition this variant, so it's definitely a good variant for beginners. My only hope with this variant now is in terms of its strength. I just really hope that this turns out to be a strong clay. Then I could definitely use this for every possible project that I can think of. Usually the deeper pigmented clays in Oytra in the past have been a softer variety in my experience. Like whatever varieties I've used in the past, I've usually had to leach the deeper pigmented versions, but this one looks quite consistent across colors if I go by the test samples that were sent to me. It does remind me of the 10 colors kids variant also in terms of consistency. So regardless of the color intensity, this clay appears to be quite consistent in its texture. It's easier on the hands also, no need for the pasta machine, and absolutely no need for leaching. I'll now check how this clay works with an acrylic roller and a pasta machine as well. It does not necessarily need a pasta machine to be worked with, but in case you have one and you generally tend to use one, we shall see how it works on the clay as well. I'm sure an acrylic roller will work like a breeze on this one. Using depth guides or just cardstocks on the sides, I can see that this can be rolled out in consistent thicknesses just by using an acrylic roller. You don't even need a pasta machine. I am not feeling a lot of stress on my palms when I'm rolling this out with an acrylic roller. So it's pretty soft yet not sticky and great for working with an acrylic roller. So given how soft this clay is, I was actually expecting this to wrinkle on my pasta machine, but it didn't. How cool! Like, it seems to be behaving very well on the machine. I'm surprised. I just hope I'm not trapping any air bubbles though, because I'm not being very careful about it at the moment. So that is another thing we'll have to look out for. So I can see some white patches while I'm doing this though. I mean, I just hope it doesn't lead to plucking. Plucking is basically white patches that appear once you bake your clay. It can be due to a lot of reasons. We'll have to check for that also when we bake this. Another thing that we should pay attention to is the opacity of this clay. Now, what does that mean? It means that the pigment ratio is lower in the clay, which means the translucency increases. If the pigment is less, it will be a more translucent clay, and this could lead to darkening when it gets baked. So when you see a color change in clay, usually it happens because the pigment ratio is lower in the clay and it is far more translucent, and hence it darkens when it bakes. So that is another thing. Opacity is something that you cannot check for when you are not baking the clay. You can either hold it against the light and see if it is translucent, but most of the times in these cases, the best way to learn about it is after baking. I'll be conditioning this on a setting of 3 on my pasta machine. I'll see if, yeah, it does give bubbles, but I don't see how that is an issue. Now I can see some bubbles in this, so I'll keep slitting through this with my blade and try to get rid of them as much as possible. You can slightly stretch it out with your hand also to reduce them while you're passing them through the pasta machine to condition it. But that is not so much of an issue for me right now because it's not too many. It's pretty much controllable, which happens with most brands actually. If you look at most brands, those bubbles are not really a deal breaker for me because it's not too many. It's holding up pretty well. Yes, I think this is decent consistency to work with. It's not sticking to my hand. It's very easy to work with. I think I'm happy with this. It's not, it's so far it's easy to condition also. It's done conditioning. I'm done conditioning this. It's not breaking, it's not cracking. It's fully conditioned. I think I ran it past the machine some 7 to 8 times and I'm good to go. The little bubbles I will have to pop, of course, but otherwise I don't see any issue in this. It's not a deal breaker for me, at least. It's good quality clay. Let me try the green as well to condition. I always knead the clay a little in my fingers, between my fingers, before I pass it through the pasta machine. It's just easier, otherwise it shreds and leaves residue in my clay machine, which I'm not a fan of. So it's ideal that you knead the clay a little before you pass it through the pasta machine, leaving lesser residue for you to clean up. So yeah, I think I can pass it through the pasta machine now. Not bad. Now this color has a dangerous amount of bubbles that I can see, and it will become an issue when I bake it. I'm not expecting a smooth surface in this version for sure, but I'll try my best to get rid of as many bubbles as possible. Now the reason I'm not editing these parts out is because I want you to see how much effort goes into just making clay workable before you can even start creating with it. I mean, you need to pay attention to so many things like conditioning it correctly, getting rid of bubbles, which is a lot of effort, even distribution of pigment, because sometimes in some clays the pigment will not be evenly distributed. You might find blotches of pigment in parts of the clay. Many more things before you can even start working with it, and it's good to see how much effort goes into doing it. Sometimes it's very therapeutic. Not sometimes, all the time. Clay is very therapeutic, and you don't have to just create all the time. You can just play with clay. Just the feeling of clay in your hands is quite therapeutic and cathartic in a way. So, if you've never tried this medium, I would definitely tell you to try using this medium at least once, and you will see how it makes a difference. Okay, yeah, I think I'm done checking the consistency of this variant. Both the colors seem to be quite easy to work with, almost no residue on surfaces, great with both acrylic roller and the pasta machine. It was very easy to work on it with an acrylic roller and a pasta machine. But I do feel the bubbles will be an issue when I bake this, but I'll keep that verdict for after I'm done baking this. About the techniques that we could use this variant for, I think these could be great for sculpting, creating miniatures, clay painting, making beads, maybe even simple canes for that matter. But first, let's see how it fares in the baking test, and then we'll decide how well this can be used. Okay, so before I talk about how this variant performed in the oven, I'd like to talk about baking polymer clay just in general, because there are two things to keep in mind while baking. One is temperature, and second is the surface on which you'll be baking. For temperature, investing in an oven thermometer is like the wisest decision when baking polymer clay, because most ovens, new or old, it doesn't matter how new it is, most of them are off on their temperature settings, which is like the most crucial factor for the chemical reaction to take place. The chemical reaction ensures that your clay cures properly. So the thermometer will actually help you set the exact temperature as per the brand guidelines. Each brand has its own temperature requirements, and this can prevent burning or probably even under baking of your pieces, which is one of the most common problems people complain about when they're baking polymer clay. And the second part of baking is to find a good surface to bake on. What I use is a glass slab that I got custom cut from a glass shop nearby. So you can also use a ceramic tile or even a steel plate. Just remember that if you bake clay directly on the slab or whatever surface you're using, you are bound to get shiny spots on the clay that faces down. So for avoiding this, you can put a sheet of plain printer paper to get smooth surfaces on your clay. Otherwise, you can get really ugly shiny spots and bubbles on the surface that touches the baking surface you put the clay on. Another thing that I use is a foil container that you usually get with your deliveries, food deliveries at home. You can buy like a bunch of these from Amazon, and I use that to cover my pieces while they are baking so that it regulates the temperature inside the foil container and ensures that the temperature is consistent throughout the baking time. So I ended up baking the pieces that I had conditioned. I created 3 pieces out of the brand and baked them at 3 different categories. One was at the prescribed temperature that was suggested by the brand. One was that was 5 degrees higher and for 1 hour, and one was 5 degrees lesser than the prescribed temperature for 20 minutes. So and for this I used an oven thermometer to get the most accurate reading on the ovens. This I would also recommend most of you to invest in one. It's not a very expensive device to get if you are really serious about creating quality pieces, quality polymer clay pieces. It just gives you an exact reading of the polymer clay, of the oven in which you're planning to bake the pieces. Because ovens usually don't give the correct reading as per the knob. It's not necessary. If your knob is reading 250 degrees, it will be heating at 250 degrees. It could be higher or lower depending on what your oven is set at. So most ovens are usually off by a few degrees up or below, 5 degrees up, 5 degrees below. Some are way beyond that as well. So having an oven thermometer is always a good idea when you bake your pieces. So I use an oven thermometer to do the exact temperature reading, which I usually use for most of my pieces also. I bake the basic under 3 variations. Prescribed temperature -5 degrees, +5 degrees, and a variation of 30 minutes, 20 minutes, and 1 hour. The prescribed temperature for this variant is 120 to 130 degrees centigrades. This is similar to the classic series, and prescribed bake time is of 30 minutes. So I have stuck to 130 degrees centigrades in this, taking the higher limit, and also stuck to 30 minutes the prescribed bake time. And the other variant is baked at 125, and the third variant is baked at 135 at varying time frames. So if I look at the quality of this particular clay, it does tend to bubble. There are bubbles in this no matter what variant or how much I baked. It does tend to bubble. So but if you look at the back side, there are no bubbles. So I think if you place like a tile on top of it, you can reduce the bubbles for flat pieces. The back side has no bubbles. So that is one thing. Let's look at the color variation in this particular clay. I'll show you the original color and the variation from that original color. So this is the original color of the clay and the baked version on prescribed temperature plus time. So there's no difference in color, if you can see that. Absolutely no difference. But if you look closely, there's visible bubbles on the surface. My heart is really broken looking at that. But no darkening of the pigment and absolutely no translucency. I wasn't expecting this variation, this version to have any color variation in this one, because it's below the prescribed temperature. It's very true to the original color and opacity, but lots of bubbles on the surface. So that is disheartening, but the color change is absolutely non-existent. And if I baked it at 5 degrees higher than the prescribed, there is a color variation. It has burned on a very light level. If you see a slight yellowing or browning of the color, so there is a difference in the color. Again, there has been bubbling in all 3 pieces. I will now check the strength of these 3 pieces. This is the prescribed temperature. Let's see how this holds up against. Ooh, this snaps. This is definitely not cured properly. And I'm assuming this will break as well if it hasn't got the correct temperature and the correct amount of time. This is definitely underbaked. This will definitely break. Yes. And now I will check if I've increased the temperature of this particular clay by 5 degrees and increase the time of baking. It tends to hold far more stronger, but it's still not as strong. It still tends to tear, and I can break it. Yes. There is a bit of resistance, but it still breaks. So yeah, that is the verdict on the basic polymer clay by Oytra. This one has not really lived up to the baking prescribed temperature and time, and the strength and flexibility is also not quite up to the mark. So I'm assuming that if you bake this at the prescribed temperature for probably an hour and a half, it might cure properly, but I'm not counting on that. I might have to think again about how to maintain the strength of this particular clay. Let's revisit the pros of this variant. I'm quite pleased with the opacity and the color of this particular variant. It doesn't change on baking, no plucking, great consistency to work with, and no need for leaching either. Now the cons of this variant, the strength is definitely an issue and it might require longer bake time to fix that. Has a lot of bubbles upon baking, so avoid using this for flat surfaces or bake it sandwiched between tiles or slabs. I'm also not a fan of the packaging, which could be a little better in my opinion. I'd like to end by saying that there's no such thing as bad clay. You're probably not using that clay for the intended purpose, and that's why it's not working out the way you want it to. I hope you liked this detailed review of the basic variant. Please don't forget to like or share this video. Helps me stay motivated to create more content for you. Also, please subscribe if you'd like to see more videos on polymer clay and other art mediums in the future. Bye for now. Enjoy claying.